JRPG. When you hear this term, you tend to think of games like Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, or just anime-like RPGs. Sometimes, I wonder what was there way before these popular JRPG franchises that we all heard of. What games contributed to the start of this subgenre? For Dragon Quest, which many consider to be the first console JRPG to popularize the genre, there were what you can call ProtoJRPGs. These were experimental Japanese-made games with some RPG elements, but not fully RPGs. Some of these proto-JRPGs were being made around the early 1980s for PCs, which is kind of unheard of in the Japanese gaming industry, since Japan is very well known for having a big console-centric market and user base. A lot of currently well-known companies like Koei and Nihon Falcom made a lot of these experimental computer RPGs. Some of the earliest proto-JRPGs are believed to be Koei's Underground Exploration and Pony Canyon's Spy Daisakusen. Something that makes Spy Daisakusen stand out is that it didn't go for any sort of cliché medieval fantasy setting, but instead follows a modern espionage theme. But get this game is literally based off of the Mission Impossible franchise. Don't know how the small company got the licensing for it, but it exists. When this game is booted up, it actually says role-playing adventure game, and you get a message via tape recorder, just like in Mission Impossible. One of the known RPG elements in this game is that you get some sort of stats, but they're completely randomly generated and can only be reset to something else if you reset your computer. The first level displays some sort of early adventure game gameplay, like choosing which direction to go and simply deciding if you want to attack someone or not. It's pretty basic, but it gets the job done. Another early game is Danjizuma no Yuaku, aka Seduction of the Condominium Wives, which is considered to be one of the first eroge ever made, but it also has some RPG elements in it. This one is also by Koei. The basic premise is that you play the door-to-door salesman who's going around selling condoms to wives and have some fun with them while you're at it. This game also has various starting stats like virility, health, intelligence, but it's not random and you can roll for your stats at the start. This is an eroge by nature, but actually has turn-based combat in a basic sense. When you try to traverse the harsh streets, you can get jumped by gangsters or even ghosts. The only action you can choose when attacked is to just keep pressing attack and moving on with the reward of some chump change. For the main seduction part, you have various options like knock, open, pay, sell, and they're very useful. Success rate of this last command is ultimately defined by the combination of actions you choose in a particular order, along with your stats and the woman's. When you finally get a woman to open her door, you can see a description of her on the right side of the screen, along with some values that define her looks. Overall, the game has very limited options when interacting with someone, and there's barely any strategy to it. The main function is for the erotic enjoyment, so I guess it makes sense for it to be very basic. But even the spicy scenes don't have much to offer since they're very heavily censored, with just some interactability, like just tapping one key on your keyboard at a steady rate. It is pretty impressive that some of the first eroge have some RPG elements, and you can probably see why people must have bought this one in particular. Out of all of these though, the most influential first proper RPG made in Japanese is Black Onyx. The irony about this one is that it wasn't even made by a Japanese corporation, but a single foreigner. Let me tell you about Amsterdam-born Hank Rogers, who moved to Japan to chase some girl. Hank Rogers got a job with his love interest's parents' gem company, and didn't really know any Japanese. But one thing they noticed initially was about how less Dungeons & Dragons made any impact in Japan. In the West, as many of you know, it's literally one of the most popular tabletop RPGs to this day. So, in 1982, he decided, let's share some culture and introduce these people to what a proper RPG is. He wanted to program his own RPG specifically for Japanese gamers. And I quote, "It was immediately obvious to me that the core difference between the two markets was that there were no computer role-playing games in Japan," he said in an interview with the magazine. Saying this, he felt like he could really penetrate the market and introduce people to something that no one has ever seen before. He saved up $10,000 at the time, which is equivalent to approximately $32,000 today just for a PC 8801. This price makes the GPU prices these days look very cheap. From this huge investment, he made Black Onyx. Black Onyx shared a lot of elements of first-person dungeon crawling with Western RPGs like Ultima and Wizardry, but also created some of the biggest changes which are still used to this day, like character appearance customization, displaying health as a colored bar instead of just a number, and being able to recruit NPCs to your 5-man party. Despite having all these features and more, this game tanked on release in January 1984. Japanese people didn't really understand the game and weren't drawn to the Western fantasy aesthetics. It originally only sold 5 copies in total, all within the first 2 months of release. Rogers then decided to go hard on the marketing. He hired a translator and visited every major Japanese PC magazine and demoed the game in person. When demoing the game, he just helped people choose a character, customize it, and then left them to discover it on their own. People were amazed by the idea of creating your own character, and that's it. Every magazine ran extensive coverage, and Black Onyx sold 150,000 copies, to become the best-selling Japanese video game a year later. With this, the RPG genre started gaining some following in Japan. Following this major milestone in JRPG history, we actually got a couple of more interesting games from some other well-known companies. Namco, before the Bandai Namco merger, was making a lot of arcade games in the 80s, especially with the success of Pac-Man. One of these arcade games, which was released on July 1984, was Tower of Druaga. Tower of Druaga was dubbed as the Fantasy Pac-Man and follows the story of a guy named Gilgamesh who needs to climb 60 floors of this tower to save the princess from an evil being known as Druaga. A unique mechanic was added to fight the monsters. You simply need to bump into them in real time. In a way, it was one of the first action games. Besides the core gameplay, it has various traps to avoid and items to collect, as you would expect in a dungeon crawler. To advance each floor, you need to find a randomly placed key and unlock the door to the next floor. It seems fairly simple at a glance, but it has strange difficult requirements to actually beat the game. The thing is, there are hidden chests with special items on each floor, and these items are required to beat the game. They are required because without them you can die into later floors or simply get stuck and not be able to progress at all. Some of these items are a pickaxe which can break walls, a candle that can reveal ghosts, and other similar helpful items. The main tricky part is to be able to find and unlock the hidden chests on each floor. For example, in floor 18, you need to avoid touching any walls for 10 seconds to reveal the hidden chest. And to unlock that particular chest, you need to get the unlock potion from floor 17. But that only appears if you allowed a ghost mage to teleport 5 times. Now, inside the hidden chest on floor 18 is a Dragon Slayer sword, but you can only equip it if you got the white sword from floor 5. So I think you can see how this can get really annoying real fast, since there's no real logical way to discover this other than by trial and error, or word of mouth. On top of all this, there's a time limit because it wasn't hard enough already. Nihon Falcom, the company now known for various series such as The Legend of Heroes, Ys, and Trail series, created the first ever action RPG with Dragon Slayer. Dragon Slayer released in November 1984. It's basically about how you're locked inside a huge dungeon and you're tasked to slay a dragon, just as the name suggests. But you start off with very low stats and need to grind a lot. That's the main focus, grinding. You grind and get items till you can beat the dragon, and then a new dungeon with a new dragon appears. You can only carry one item on you at all times, and must store excess items in your house, which is in the starting point in the dungeon. And for some reason, you can actually push your house around the dungeon. I guess the main character doesn't want to be homesick. Finally, one of the last influential games before Dragon Quest is Xanadu. Xanadu is also by Falcom and is a sequel to Dragon Slayer. You can see it looks way better, and they changed a lot of things. They added a starting town to train stats and be able to buy items from NPCs. There is a maze beneath the town which can be explored in a side-scrolling view, but this time, when you touch an enemy or enter a dungeon, you enter a top-down arena view, which was adapted by The Legend of Zelda much later. There's a lot more diversity with the game, from monsters to items and even various bosses. There is a unique boss battle room as well. The combat still involves bumping into enemies, but with the added variety of items and enemies, it's a lot less repetitive. It's crazy to think that to this day, that Xanadu is one of Falcom's greatest achievements. They sold 400,000 copies of this game, and for a PC game, when PCs were expensive and not as accessible, that's very impressive. All these games that I've mentioned have invented new mechanics or inspired future games to some extent. Without them, the JRPG genre may be drastically different from what we see today. I'm hoping that moving forward we can see more critically acclaimed games in the JRPG genre that improve upon the basic foundation laid down by these games.